Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary and presently Chairman of Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, to have a very in-depth discussion with us on the impact of this big slowdown in global economies flowing from China's mini financial crisis and a slowdown in China's GDP. And the kind of impact it is having on India, and how China and India, among emerging economies, what sort of strategy these two big emerging economies could resort to in the next 4 or 5 years to emerge from this stronger. To discuss this and other issues, we have with us Mr. Shyam Saran. Welcome to our show, Mr. Shyam Saran. So you have been, of late, been writing a lot on China, India, and the geo-economics and geopolitical fallout of essentially the rise of these two powers in this region. So tell us, how do you read the current episode of a bigger slowdown in the region, especially in the Asian region, because of China, and how do you see China emerging from this? And how do you see India responding to this situation?
Firstly, I think one should not make too much of the slowdown in the Chinese economy, because this has been, in a sense, factored into the calculations of most economic managers, because nobody would have expected that, an economy of the size of China, which has already been growing.
It's $10 trillion now, yeah.
So it's an economy which is reaching a stage of maturation, in a sense. And when you reach that point, then obviously ability to keep the growth rate at a very high figure of 8 to 9 or 10% is simply not possible. So that the Chinese economy has been slowing down is something which has been apparent for some time. And I think what the Chinese are trying to do, which is the right thing to do, is to try and move away from labor-intensive, low-wage occupations, manufacturing, to higher value-added segments. So more knowledge-integrated processes, more technology-driven processes. You can see this happening.
Now, so they're moving up the value chain.
Absolutely. There is no doubt that they are moving up a value chain. And it should come as no surprise that when you make that kind of a transition, which is a major transition, it will be somewhat painful. It would cause some dislocation, and that is what is happening. But my sense is that the Chinese economy, even if it slows down, any kind of expectation that somehow we are looking at the Chinese economy going into reverse or the Chinese economy coming to a grinding halt, I think those calculations are misplaced.
Okay. Mr. Saran, one analysis or many analysts sitting in India, even policymakers have now come out with their response to the China so-called crisis. And their first response or reaction has been that India is far less integrated with China or generally with the global economy. So India is far less affected by China. Do you agree with this?
I think it is rather ironical, because I also saw some figures recently which shows that the Indian economy is more globalized today than the Chinese economy.
Yeah, if you take the import-exports together, it's nearly 50% of GDP.
To say that the Indian economy is somehow less exposed to the global economy, I think is something that one should be a little careful making that statement. And it's not just the issue of China's direct impact on you, but because China's economy is also integrated with the regional economy, it is integrated with the global economy. What impact takes place on India is not only related to what is happening in China, but what that is doing to
the other economies.
Exactly. So from that point of view, To say that we are somehow insulated and we are in a good place, I don't think that is
It's very interesting you're saying this, because only yesterday, one of the big investors, global investors called Mark Faber, he argued that China's slowdown is impacting a lot of resource exporting countries from whom China was buying. In fact, China today buys 40 to 50% of oil, steel, aluminium. So when all those economies get affected, like Africa, Russia, Brazil, then their capacity to buy from India goes down.
Exactly.
So it would affect India's exports to to those economies, right?
As you know that, and this is something which I have pointed out, that the trend that we have seen at least since 1980 of global trade rising double the rate of global GDP.
Yeah, which is not
6%, 7% against 3% growth rate. Now, global trade is rising at the same rate as GDP, and in the last 2 years actually slower than the global GDP.
In fact, in the last year it's close to zero actually.
So you are facing today a far more competitive global market, and that it has come to me as no surprise that the Chinese exports have gone down by 8%, and the Indian exports have remained more or less stagnant at about $300 billion a year.
In fact, we've had negative export growth for the last 7 months.
Right. So we have.
So you're saying that we are being impacted. Yeah.
There is no doubt that we are being impacted. Now the issue is, every crisis, I think it's a bit of a cliche, but every crisis is also supposed to be an opportunity, and I think that there are opportunities for India in the way the global economy is getting transformed. The issue is whether or not your government and your business can see these overall global trends and try to stay ahead of the curve rather than always be catching up. That's the issue, and that's really a mindset problem.
So you have expressed the view that Indian policymakers have generally adopted a defensive posture, whether in WTO or whether when it comes to aggressively participating in regional trade agreements. Even Indian businesses have been very defensive.
I would say Indian businesses have been more defensive sometimes than the government.
Because trade has slowed down and businesses are, in the last 3-4 years, at least 3 years, there's a slowdown in India. Suddenly, Indian businesses are talking about reversing some of the free trade agreements that India has signed with ASEAN and other countries, Japan, etc. Comprehensive economic cooperation agreements, including merchandise and services. Do you think this is a good idea?
This is would be wrong strategy. Free trade agreements are here to stay. So we should not try and somehow or the other reverse history. The problem has been that we have gone into several of these FTAs not looking at them as opportunities to expand your trade, to expand your economic collaboration with your partner countries, but largely in order to defend what you have. Oh, I have a certain market share in that country. If I get into a free trade agreement with that country, then maybe I can at least preserve my market share. Not looking at that as a means of expanding your market.
But do you think we are not doing it because we have not sorted out our own internal issues of productivity, competitiveness, which policymakers do talk about? For instance, our tax regimes are not so competitive. Our indirect tax regime, which this GST bill was supposed to address, we have among the highest indirect tax rates. If you total up all the taxes, they total up to 30% plus. And there's ample research on this. Do you see that there's a lot of internal reform which is lacking in order to be competitive?
There is no doubt that we are falling behind in that respect. I always say that you first need to produce a free trade area in India before you start looking at how to gain from free trade areas.
Market within India.
Yes, exactly. So we are still not a fully integrated domestic market. Secondly, I mean, we look at tariffs as being very important, but if you look at most countries, the greater component of cost, in a sense, is transaction cost. What is your transportation cost? What is behind the border, as they say, situation? What is it that is happening at the border. Now, if the clearance of goods takes a longer period of time, if there are too many regulations that have to be adhered to before you can actually export or import, naturally the cost of transaction will go up. Therefore, even if the tariff is low, you are not able to really take advantage of that because of the fact that you haven't been able to sort out the other issues. So, GST is actually the minimum that is required. You need to do far more in terms of improving your transportation network. Today we are talking about paperless trade.
Yeah, sure.
So the number of regulations, the documentation that has to be gone through, all that needs to be addressed, and we are, I'm afraid, rather slow in doing so.
Yeah. Especially in the context of South Asia trade, these barriers are like unimaginably high, right?
Well, true. I mean, for example, I have pointed out that if you take a container which has to go, say, from Dhaka to Lahore, it takes something like 3 to 4 weeks, because from Dhaka it has to travel to Chittagong, then it has to take a ship, goes right around the peninsula of India, gets to Karachi, then it is transshipped onto maybe a truck or to a train, then it goes to Lahore. And if you take the cost which is involved in this, it is several times what it would have been if that could just get onto a train from Dhaka, go across India and land up in Lahore.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And it would take, according to our calculations, it would take less than 5 days as compared to 3 weeks or more if the current route that is being taken. So, if you do not address these issues, the greatest advantage you have in South Asia is what? Your proximity.
Yeah, sure.
But you are not able to leverage that proximity because you have put so many barriers. We are not looking at our borders, as I say, as connectors, but rather as walls behind which we have to protect ourselves. That mindset has to go. You have to look at borders as actually instruments through which you can advance your economic.
So you are essentially saying that as the world has slowed down, as trade has stagnated in the last, say, two years, this is really the time to come up and implement these ideas with urgency, without delay. Is that what you say?
It is already, I think we are, as I said, behind the curve.
Yeah, we are already.
You need to make that extra effort to be ahead of the curve. Okay. And it is an opportunity because of the fact that making certain not very radical changes, like the GST, you actually, the payoff for you is pretty large. In terms of productivity, it can give you a big payoff.
So you're saying there are a lot of low-hanging fruits which need to be plucked.
And there are companies in India which have been taking advantage of this. If you look at certain enterprises, they are already globally competitive. These are companies which have a certain reputation globally. So it is not that Indian enterprise has not been able to adjust to more competitive conditions. But this is not something about, this company or that company. This has to be an economy-wide change that has to take place.
We'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and keep watching RST. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are talking to Mr. Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary and Chairman of Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries. Mr. Shyam Saran, you rightly said that India should not lose time, and we should, all the low-hanging fruits that are available should be taken in creating a seamless, smooth web of regional trade. Now, in this context, how do you see China and its effort to create massive infrastructure, what is called One Belt, One Road, in the region around Central Asia, around Afghanistan, Pakistan?
Here, I think the problem with the One Belt, One Road specifically for India is really the China-Pakistan corridor, because the China-Pakistan corridor goes through territory which is claimed by India. Therefore, it is difficult for us, given that situation, to sign on to something like this without reservations. As far as the maritime part is concerned, to the extent that China is ready to sit down with us in the designing of that particular initiative, we should be open-minded about it, But so far that has not happened.
Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar.
Well, the BCIM corridor, as you know, politically that has already been accepted by India. So I don't see any problem with that, because I think all the 4 countries involved, except that having those kind of transport linkages amongst the 4 countries is to everybody's
So
advantage.
India has no issues with that, because I was told that India is going a bit slow on that also.
Well, I think India wants to make sure that as far as the infrastructure on our side is concerned, keeps pace with whatever cross-border infrastructure which is being developed. It would not be very useful for India if the cross-border linkages outpace the infrastructure which is being created on our side. So we need, for example, on the Indian side, as far as the Northeast is concerned, because that is the critical component in the BCIM corridor. First of all, you need to be able to improve the connectivity of the Northeast with the rest of India.
Okay.
Second, you need to improve connectivity within the Northeast itself, which is very, very sparse. And third is the cross-border connectivity. So these are 3 different components or categories, but each is important for the other. Okay. So you need to have an integrated plan to develop all these 3 categories together for any one of them to actually work. You see, northeastern states have a complaint. They say you are treating us as if we are only a transit corridor. What is in it, what is there in it for us? So those transport corridors that you are thinking of actually must be converted into economic corridors. They should create, economic opportunities, employment opportunities for the people of the Northeast also.
Some analysts have described this larger China plan, which is still evolving, as you said. It needs to be discussed for this whole region as somewhat akin to Marshall Plan, which post-war, when America spent roughly $13 billion, I'm told, in a period of 6 years, which in today's value, inflation-adjusted value, will be about $130 billion. And China is actually talking about amounts close to that. So do you think the way Marshall Plan, of course, it was a post-war project, created massive infrastructure and employment growth there, this kind of Chinese investment would do a similar thing in this region? Is there a potential? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I think these are...
If security issues are sorted out, if there is no suspicions around security...
Well, number one, I see this as a rather different case to the Marshall Plan, because Marshall Plan did not involve so much investment by American companies in Europe, but involved large-scale transfers of funds, assistance to Europe. Of course, it also created
investments,
opportunities for investment.
Yeah. Like Fiat, US set up a factory in Italy. Fiat.
As I said, there's no doubt that there was a heavy investment component also, but a large amount of money was spent in actually rehabilitating.
Because there was a need for reconstruction.
Yes. So much of the reconstruction was carried through public funding that came from the United States. Here we are talking about commercial investment. Yeah. China is not investing money in order to bring about new infrastructure as Chinese assistance to these countries. It is a kind of venture which also must give a return to China.
In a sense, it is also China's public funding, no? Because most of the companies are government-owned.
Well, they are government-owned, but they want a return.
Yeah, they want a return.
So it's not that China will go and invest money into something where a return is not possible.
But Mr. Saran, typically in infrastructure, returns take a long time to come. So the Chinese have patience.
True. It's not only patience. You need institutions for that. And the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is one such institution.
And the BRICS, perhaps.
BRICS is another institution. So Chinese are going about it in a systematic way. It's not merely a issue of, being able to wait for many years. You need development financing of a certain kind, and the building blocks for that are being set up. So that's a very systematic way in which
So you're saying India should also be an active participant in...
Well, India is already a member of the in Asia infrastructure.
But are we being defensive here, or are being...
No, I don't see a defensiveness here, because after all, Indian economy needs a lot of capital investment. And if this can be a source of capital investment in our infrastructure, why should we say no to that? Yeah. What I'm worried about is that with respect to this kind of network which is being developed, you see, in a sense, what we are seeing in the region is that economic complementarities or economic linkages seem to have outpaced the progress in the security architecture.
Sure.
You know, so while this
you're saying that the compulsion of the material
right.
growth.
So I mean, sooner or later you need to have that symmetry.
So there are two problems you pointed out. The security issues are way behind the curve, and economic compulsions or economic logic is really run ahead with the ball, right? Now, assuming that this is happening, and assuming that India will be far more proactive in Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and far more proactive in creation of infrastructure around this region. Now, tell me, what should India's attitude be to some of other attempts by China? Like you recently wrote in an article that China is also trying to regionalize its currency, right? It is trying to convert yuan into a hard currency. Part of that effort is also to get the IMF SDR to accept yuan as part of the basket, give some weightage to yuan, which is probably will happen in due course, although this financial crisis may have put some roadblocks to that development. But otherwise, how do you see, how should India look at yuan emerging as a, slowly but surely as a regional currency of some importance, maybe replace yen in the next 5, 7, 10 years. So many countries are accepting yuan as part of their reserves in their central bank, which you have also mentioned. And how do you see, what should India's attitude be?
Well, I mean, there is not much that India can do in this respect. Yeah. Frankly speaking, what kind of a status the Chinese yuan is able to aspire to will essentially depend upon very important decisions which have to be taken by China itself. Yeah. And the difficulty which I see is, it is much easier, for example, to do what China has done, that is settling more and more of its trade account in yuans. You know, it is now, I think, it's already...
It's also happening within BRICS. We have accepted that proposition.
Sure. So that's easier to do. Secondly, as you mentioned, that some central banks, although not many, some central banks have accepted part of their reserves in Chinese yuans. Third, very important, is the direct sort of settlement of currency accounts. That is, instead of going through the mediation of the US dollar. So if you are doing trade with, for example, or other transactions with Japan, you can settle now directly between yuan and yen without having to go through the dollar. Similar is the case with Australia and a number of other countries. Now, all this, in a sense, are also low-hanging fruit. Yeah. So these are easier to handle. Where the problem arises is when you actually make it into a freely convertible currency. Okay. If it is a freely convertible currency, then your ability to control that currency and the various, fluctuations in that currency, or how the rest of the world market uses that currency, because you don't have that control over other users of that currency, unless you are willing to accept that you will have to let the market.
Which is what China was trying to signal recently, right, by devaluing?
Well, partly, but it was partly also, to raise the competitiveness of its exports. I mean, the two came in a sense together. Given the kind of still a political system that is in place, which does not want to yield control beyond a certain point, that is where I think the crux will lie.
That's right.
Whether or not at a certain point of time, China would be ready to accept that its currency, being international, is not fully within the control of the state. It will be determined more and more by the market.
In a sense, the relationship between market and democracy.
Exactly. So I think that's
so that we'll have to see how that plays out.
That's exactly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shyam Saran, for talking to us. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.